Welcome to Wander Mode, a podcast that wanders through topics such as entrepreneurship, traveling, and mamahood. As a teacher turned entrepreneur and a mama to one, I am sharing my tips and tricks to maintain harmony in a multifaceted life. Let's wander. Everyone is in for a real treat with my guest today, Taylor Powelson. Taylor is a mother, a wife, and sync certified coach, in addition to being a hormone nutritionist and a sign language interpreter. Talk about multifaceted, our favorite kind of person on this podcast. Taylor is obsessed with all things menstrual cycles, and that is exactly what we are here to discuss today. How syncing with our cycles can transform our lives. Taylor, thanks so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Let's jump in first with telling us a little bit about yourself and how you became interested in menstrual cycle health.
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So I have always been in the world of wellness and medicine and all things healing since I can remember. I used to work as a medical assistant in various clinics at the hospital here at the University of Utah. I got my yoga certificate to teach back in 2013. I've hosted workshops on various topics. I've just always had my foot in how can I make myself better and then share that with the world. So I've always been into this kind of space. And then I had children and things changed quite a bit. Before having children, which many of your listeners may be able to relate to, I felt pretty good at being able to take care of myself. I could have my own agenda, do anything that I really needed to on my own time. And then insert 2 children and things got wild, especially after my second. About a year after having my second, and just to reference, my children now are almost 5 and almost 7. So this was about 4.5-ish years ago. I was hot mess express, like even more so than just unorganized and feeling like you don't know what's going on in the world. Like it was extreme. I had extreme irritability, rage, anger, always touched out, severe emotional breakdowns over what felt like nothing. I just felt very disconnected from myself and found it very hard to take care of myself. So at that time, I went to where I knew to go to for help, which was my OBGYN. So I went, I explained to them what I was experiencing and how I was feeling, and I was met with birth control and antidepressants. And while I know in my heart those medicines have a place in this world, they have an absolute function, I knew at that time that wasn't the solution for me. I knew that that would be covering up what was actually the root problem here, what was really going on. I knew that was a temporary fix and it wasn't for me. I also knew that if I was getting handed this solution, that I wasn't alone, that had to be happening to other women. So that's kind of when my journey into hormone health really started. I noticed that my rage and irritability was cyclical, meaning that it had a pattern and related to my menstrual cycle. So I went down this huge rabbit hole of hormone health and cycle syncing. I took courses and workshops and read books and listened to podcasts and just soaked this up because all the while felt like validated. I felt like I was being heard and seen. These were things I was learning that I had never heard of before. I had never learned before. And I was in my early 30s and I didn't know this kind of thing. So if I knew that I was having all of these light bulb and aha moments, that I wasn't alone, and I would talk to more girlfriends and they're like, what are you talking about? Tell me more. And they could relate. And on the story goes. And now I am where I am now, where my sole mission is to teach other moms and women about their menstrual cycles, their hormone health, and how they can learn to live in sync with these types of things and really help any type of that irritability, that PMS kind of feeling to decrease, as well as just living more in sync and align with how your body was designed to work. So that's kind of where it came from.
It's so fascinating that, like you said, prior to kids, you're living life as you normally would, and then you have kids, lots of body changes, hormone changes, and that's what led you to this discovery. So over the course of the years in which you've learned about all of this, what's your impression as to why those are kind of the first solutions that are being given to women rather than this knowledge around our menstrual cycles?
Yeah, great question. And really, that's kind of the medical field in general, that it's very, very medication based. That's where the money is made for the facilities that we go to, for the doctors that we see, and they do work. If I had taken birth control and antidepressants, I'm sure I would have felt much better, but it wouldn't have gotten at the root cause. I would have been taking synthetic hormones, throwing my entire cycle out of whack. While I may have felt better, what was happening internally with my endocrine system, my hormone system, my gut health, that would have been totally out of whack. And so while it may have been a temporary fix and thought, okay, it worked, great, it doesn't actually get at root cause. So it's a quick fix, it's easy, it makes everyone money, and it's fast. And so I think that in our society, we look to those things. Whereas the route that I took was the long game. It took more time investment, money investment. I didn't see a quick fix. You know, it wasn't 4 weeks later, I suddenly feel better. It took a while, and I'm still on the journey now. It's always evolving and changing. And so that takes dedication and a certain kind of mindset. So I think it's not the easy way out. It's the long game, which not a lot of people are into. So I think that's where it stems from.
Yeah, fast and effective, right?
Yeah.
Fast and effective, kind of like our coffee in the morning or whatever that we need for that like instant boost. So tell me a little bit about your journey to learning about all of this and consuming all of this knowledge. Did you start on Google? Did you look for documentaries? Are there other cultures that you've come across where this type of knowledge is a little bit more commonplace, and so you started following things that they do, or how did your knowledge evolve?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, before I had kids, my only introduction to any of this was from a girlfriend who recommended the book Wild Power. And I read this book about 2 years before having kids. And that planted a huge seed because I had this intuitive feeling that my menstrual cycle meant more than just I bleed every month. But no one around me thought that. I didn't have language to express that. I didn't know where to look. I just thought it was this weird feeling I had. And so I never really dove into it pre-kids, except for that book. And so I read that book, and then a bit later I had children. So then I wasn't menstruating, and then I was breastfeeding, so I still wasn't having a period. And then when it came back around to that time where I was feeling very disconnected to myself after having children, I remembered that book. And so that book is really how it started and where the seed was planted. So from that book, Wild Power, then I started Googling, and that actually felt a little overwhelming because there's a lot of information out there and contradicting information. I didn't know who to trust or who to go to, or this site said this and this one said this, and they're up, it was a bit overwhelming. But from there, I found people who I started to trust, different hormone coaches, different podcasts. And so it really started that way with the book, feeling overwhelmed by Google, narrowing it down to experts. And there are a lot more books out there on the topic too. So it did just slowly start to narrow down. And like I said, I took workshops and trainings, which were really great because then I could really narrow things down and just concentrate on this course that was taught by so-and-so expert or what have you. And it didn't feel so much like I was on this journey by myself, just reading the internet and getting overwhelmed by Google. So those things really helped. And now I have my own course where I help women and mentor women to understand their own menstrual cycle awareness, how to track, how to understand their hormone health, and how to sync to the phases of their cycle. So it has been quite an evolution of where I've started to where I am now.
Mm-hmm. I think that it's one of those things that is this reminder of how little sometimes we know about our bodies. It's It's really quite shocking. And I love that you're now teaching this class to women about body awareness and how many different things that impacts. And so it's kind of a perfect segue into, for those that are listening, who are sitting here thinking like, great, let's talk about menstrual health, but I don't even know what these phases are. Like, what are the phases of our menstrual cycles, just so that we can kind of all be on the same page starting this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So there are 4 phases to a biological female's menstrual cycle. And the first one is menstrual phase, which is the most obvious. It's when we have our period, when we are shedding the lining of our uterus. That is when we bleed. It's our period. We all know that one. This is when our hormones are rock bottom. They're at their absolute lowest. So this is probably why many women feel very tired, sluggish, things like that. We don't have the energy to support much else besides resting, relaxing, reflecting. After menstrual phase, we move into follicular phase, which is when your bleed has ended and your estrogen starts to rise. And as your estrogen, which is one of your sex hormones, rises, you also feel a rise in energy. You start to feel a little bit more alive. You start to feel like the hibernation and the solo life from menstrual phase starts to kind of peel off. You're sort of like an onion and you're peeling off the layers after menstruation. You feel like, oh, okay, that's follicular phase as your estrogen rises. After follicular, you move into ovulatory phase, which is when we ovulate. This is the peak of our hormones. This is when they become the highest. Our energy can reflect that as well. This is when we may feel bold and brave. Like you look in the mirror and you're like, woo, I'm having a good hair day. What's going on? My clothes, like what? This is a good day. You're probably ovulating on that day. So that's that phase. It's short and sweet. It's typically maybe actual ovulation is 12 to 24 hours. That's how long your egg is viable. However, the phase can be longer. It can be a day or two before that or a day or two after your egg is viable. So about 3 to 5 days. And then after ovulation, you move into luteal phase, which is the 10 to 14 days before you start your next period. And this is a phase when your hormones are starting to slowly decline. And this phase is the most misunderstood phase, by women, including myself. This was the phase that I would struggle the most in. When I work with clients, this is the phase that most women struggle with in general. There's a lot of PMS, irritability, mood swings, feeling hangry, having cravings, all these things. And most of those symptoms come from not really understanding how to support yourself in this phase. So it's interesting because when you do learn the things that I teach and learn menstrual cycle awareness and how to support yourself, you really learn from your luteal phase. When you're supported, your luteal phase really has some amazing messages that are covered up by irritability and rage. So when you're supported, then you can tap into these messages. I know that was kind of a roundabout way, but basically then after luteal, you move back into menstrual phase, start your period, and then the cycle starts all over again. So again, that's menstrual, follicular, ovulatory, and luteal phase. So those are the 4 phases of your menstrual cycle. And just to be clear, it's not very black and white, like, oh, now I'm in this one. Now I'm in this one. I moved to this, there are transition days. There are days when you can feel like you're a little bit of the prior phase and the phase coming up. And all of that is very individual to each woman. So it depends on your cycle tracking and becoming aware of your own patterns.
So as you were talking about the luteal phase and then moving into the menstrual phase, would it be accurate then to say that we sometimes then have a harder time in our menstrual phase because we're not doing the things to help support ourselves in the luteal? Do the things that we do in each phase then contribute to kind of how the next phase can also occur or happen or manifest?
Yeah, Julie, you're on it. Yes, yes, totally. So what you do in one phase absolutely will affect the upcoming phases. So if, let's say, in your luteal phase, you are hitting your workouts hard, and let's say maybe you're on a diet, so you're restricting calories. You also have a to-do list a mile long. You're picking up the kids, you're dropping off the kids, your soccer mom, your PTA, like all the things. Not only is your PMS going to be extreme or your fatigue be extreme, but then moving into your menstrual phase, your body is going to be like, I haven't been able to rest. Give me rest. And then that may show up as more cramping in your menstrual phase, extreme irritability or fatigue. You may have heavy bleeding, clotting. Like, there are so many things that when you're not taking care of yourself in one phase, it will affect the next. Another example of this that is what I was experiencing in my own cycle is that after my period, and I moved into follicular phase, and I would feel on top of the world. I could definitely feel my estrogen rise. At the time, I didn't really know that that's what was happening. I just felt better after my period ended. And I would hit it hard. I would hit the gas full blast. I'd be like, woo, I feel amazing. I would lift my heaviest weights in my workouts. I would feel like I could get through my entire to-do list, do like 8 loads of laundry, all the dishes, play with the kid. I felt so good. And then come ovulatory phase, I was totally burnt out. I wasn't experiencing my inner summer in ovulatory phase. That's what they call the ovulatory phase, inner summer, when you feel very social, you feel bold and brave, high energy. I was not feeling that at all. I felt tired, and that irritation would start automatically during ovulation. And it was because I was burning myself out. I was not pacing my energy in follicular. So absolutely, what you do in one phase affects the upcoming phases.
So really, that's going to impact your productivity, your stress levels, but then you're thinking about changing things like your exercise routines and then your nutrition with those things as well.
Yeah, it's a lot. And when you think about, I love that you brought up productivity, because when we think about cycle syncing, we automatically think of exercise and nutrition. Those are kind of the blaring things that people think of syncing to their menstrual cycle. But we often forget about productivity / projects, right? That can totally be synced to your menstrual cycle. For example, I own my own wellness business, and I use social media. And the way that I have become productive in syncing my productivity with my cycle is that when I'm in my follicular phase, I feel like I can do a lot of organizing. So that's when I feel ready to make my to-do list, not necessarily ready to crush that to-do list, but I feel like my ideas are coming to me and I can write them down. And then when I'm in my ovulatory phase, I feel this natural desire, or maybe not desire, but less detest to being on camera. And so in my ovulatory phase, I will batch record any videos for any posts I'm making on social media or any lessons inside my course. I will record those because I feel great on camera. Whereas if I did that filming before I started my period, I would probably redo all of those videos over and over and over because something's off. I'm not feeling it. But when I sync it to my menstrual cycle, I get those things done so quick because it just flows better because I'm aligned with what my body and my mind naturally want to do. So that's kind of one way when we talk about productivity. You can absolutely do it with any other projects. You know, if you're writing a book, you can write the book in sync with where you are in your menstrual cycle. So in your menstrual phase, you could absolutely journal, just brain dump, just get stuff out. Your body in your menstrual phase, your brain, the left and right hemispheres of your brain are the most connected during your menstrual phase because your hormones are lowest. So this creates a clarity. Intuition is just on point. So you could brain dump, journal some ideas for your book. And then in follicular phase, you craft out, what am I going to do over my next 3 phases? And then in ovulatory phase, you get to it. You're like, okay, I am writing like I don't even know, 20 pages a day. I don't know what that's like for a book writer. I've never written a book, but they might be listening being like, no way am I going to write 20 pages a day, or like 20, that's nothing. I don't know. But basically the point is that ovulatory phase, you hit go. It's action time. And then you can continue that if you're feeling that energy into luteal phase, right? Continue your to-do list, keep going. But then you start to wrap it up. You start to make small edits, maybe in the mid part of your luteal phase, some editing, and then you kind of find a place to pause your project because you're going to be moving into your menstrual phase again, where it's better to take the load off, relax. This is where you're getting ready to pick it back up again later. So you really want to take that time to rest and reflect during menstrual phase. Even looking back at, so how did I do during that project on my last 3 phases? Did it work out? How did that feel? That kind of reflection is great during menstrual phase. So that's just an example of syncing your productivity to your menstrual cycle, which is not, no one talks about this. We just have to-do lists every day and we just burp, 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 burp. But then sometimes you're like redoing what you did because it didn't feel quite right. But when you sync to your menstrual cycle, it feels, what you're doing feels more natural and you get through it quicker and more efficiently when it's synced.
So one, if I start to discover these things and I start to have an understanding of what phase I'm in my cycle, what kind of like tips do you have around organizing that? Like put it in a calendar or just to have an awareness around that? And then my second question is, because you're a mom of 2, a wife, you have your own business, what does that look like realistically for you? You're probably very in the habit of it now, but what do you find is the ebb and flow of that of that situation for you? Like, because you're this expert, but like, how does that look in your day-to-day life?
Great. So I always suggest to women that I work with that they have an at a glance calendar or some sort of cycle tracking that is at a glance. What I mean by that is, a lot of women use apps for cycle tracking, which is great. I think apps, they serve a purpose. They're right in your back pocket. You can quickly add notes to them. That's great. They have reminders, whatever. But if you have something that is at a glance, so maybe you have a wall calendar, that's just the whole month. If you have just that month, and you can even like Google monthly 2024 calendar and print it out and just have every month is blank. There's nothing on month to month except your cycle. Just having a dedicated at a glance cycle tracker. And I'm a pen and paper kind of gal, so I like to have that paper, but you could do the same thing on Google Drive or whatever. You could just download those calendars and save them and whatever. But having that at a glance. And then first, it really takes understanding the 4 phases and where you are in the cycle. So that's kind of the first step, is just having an awareness of your 4 phases and getting used to tracking every day. And that doesn't have to be a lot. It takes sometimes for me, that's 2 minutes every morning. I pull out my tracker and I'm like, okay, how do I feel? Was it easy for me to get out of bed? Do I feel like I'm ready to start the day, or do I feel like I want to start over already? These are just small things that you can write down. Even just understanding what day of your cycle, that can help you kind of start. So we didn't talk about this in the 4 phases, but the first day of your cycle is day 1, which is the first day of your bleed. So not spotting. Spotting doesn't count as day 1, but it's the first day of actual blood. So something that you have to use a tampon for, or a pad, or a menstrual cup, or something I have to catch this now. That's day 1. And then from there, day 1, the next day would be day 2, the next day, day 3, on and on, until you start your period again. So that may be 28 days. It may be 26 days. Maybe it's 35 days, right? And that's your cycle length. So even just when you have that at a glance month calendar, just writing down day 7. And then how do you feel on day 7? Do you feel like you are feeling a rise in energy, or do you feel like you just fatigued all the time? Like, get honest and just write those things down. So that's kind of how you can start getting into the habit and practice of what does it look like to cycle track. That would be the first part. And for me, I still use an at a glance. I've transitioned from using the Google calendars to using a different journal. It's always evolving. And that's really something to celebrate and own, that even if you're changing, like, oh, that didn't work, that's totally fine. That's what this is figuring out what works for you. Because what works for me may not work for you. And that's kind of how it starts. And from there, you really build on to having it become a bigger part of your life. So like you mentioned, I have a full-time job, kiddos, all the things. And now it's such a big part of my life that my family is now aware of not exactly where I am in my cycle. I'm not like, hey, everybody, mom's on day 27 of her cycle, right? And my kids are young too. And my daughter is 5. So it's not like I'm talking to her right now about all things menstrual cycle, but she sees her mom's energy ebb and flow. I will say things like, mommy's having a low energy day. I'm going to sit on the couch. Do you want to watch a movie with me? If she asks me to go do something that I just don't really feel like doing, I'm going to suggest to her something else and why I'm suggesting that. Or sometimes it might be, I'm having a high energy day. Do you guys want to go do something? What do you want to do? Say anything and I'll say yes, right? I mean, with boundaries, whatever. But that's kind of how this can transition into your life and have your family aware, because when your family's aware, then they're better able to support where you are, where I am in my cycle. I don't have this on my fridge anymore, but when I first started out, I had printed just off of Google a chart. I think I Googled menstrual cycle hormones graph and hit image, and a bunch of stuff came up, and I clicked one, and it shows this rise, peak, and fall twice in our cycle, once in the first half of your cycle and then once in the second half. I printed that and I put it on the fridge, explained to my husband, check it out. So this is what I do over a 28-day cycle. And slowly I would show him, this is where I am now. And a little while later, when I felt a shift, I would tell him and say, I felt this shift. I'm right here in my cycle. Look at how it aligns with how high my hormones are right now. So I really taught him as I was learning myself, so that it didn't feel like one day I just knew all this stuff and I was like, okay, babe, this is what we're doing. He was really with me along the journey. So, I don't know if that directly answered your question, but it just kind of started out with the at a glance calendar, really incorporating everyone. And it was small. It was just my own little world in the beginning. And then I started to be able to expand into my partner and my kids. And now, like at dinners, whatever the protein is that aligns with what phase I'm in, that's what my whole family is eating, and it didn't start out that way. There's no way. It was very gradual, and it's not always perfect. I work a 9 to 5, so I have to go into work when I'm on my period. I can't just hook a do not disturb sign on my door and peace out. But there are things that we can do that we do have control over, right? Like, how much are we hydrating ourselves? How much are we sleeping? Our nutrition is a big thing that we have control over. And even if you do have any flexibility over your schedule, just creating more white space in your calendar during the time right before you start your period or on your period, whatever part you feel like you need more alone time, right? These are things that you slowly build on over time in your cycle tracking and cycle syncing practice.
I love that you are bringing all of your knowledge and having it be a household awareness, whatever it is that looks like, from your kids to, your partner. You can adjust the language or adjust the amount of information that you're giving based on ages. But in some ways, it probably creates a more cohesive environment because there is an awareness around that versus just kind of riding the wave or riding the roller coaster. And I have to ask, because I also have a daughter, and it's one of the things that has really been on my mind. I was not raised in a house in which we talked about our periods. I think generationally, my mom was raised to be, for lack of a better word, modest around anything that was happening with our bodies. And so it was very much this, she and I can kind of talk about it, but we don't talk about it in front of other people. We don't. And again, the amount of knowledge ended with, I have a period and I bleed once a month. Tell me a little bit about how you're going going to navigate that as your daughter ages? How are those conversations going to change for you? Because I know that I would like my daughter to be raised with this level of awareness of her body.
So this is a really great question, and I can't totally predict the future and see how it will go, but I have ideas, and there are things I'm already doing that I want to make sure she sees and she's aware of. One of which is something I already mentioned. I want to make sure she sees her mom rest, intentionally rest. I only saw my mom rest when she was sick. That was it. So I want to normalize resting and talk about high energy, low energy, and the fluctuation. I want to use words like recovery, reflection, intentional, resting. I want that to be a big part of her vocabulary. And right now, because she's so young, I really emphasize modeling. I just want to be able to show her, be as open as I can about the things that I'm doing. For example, I work out in my Airstream trailer here, and sometimes she comes in and out and whatever, and I want to make sure she knows the reason I am working out is to become strong. It's not to lose weight. So I always tell her, I'm working to make my one body strong. I have one body. And so the words that I choose are really important. Food is another one. We talk about food as energy. We don't really talk about what's healthy or not healthy, good or bad. We talk about, is this going to give me energy or is this going to deplete my energy? That's something else we talk about. And then another thing that she doesn't necessarily have full awareness of, but I'm growing it, and then she will become part of that community as the time arrives. But not only I have a course, Cycle Sync Academy, and in that course, we have a community of women who are in a group chat, and we are very open about where we are in our cycles. And I have that same type of community in a text message with my neighbors, with friends in my community. So we call it our red tent community. And this concept comes from ancient times when women used to, first of all, live together in big communities. And there was not artificial lighting. They used the light of the sun and the light of the moon. That's what they lived by. And so at that time, and there are books on this concept too, one is called Red Tent. These women would have their period at the same time and ovulate at the same time. So they were very synced together already. And in these communities, they literally had a tent. Most of the time it was red. And these women would go into this tent and they would all bleed together. They were all having their periods at the same time. So none of them were cooking. None of them were cleaning. None of them were taking care of children. There were children in the tent if they were breastfeeding, but that was it. They would sit and they would knit and crochet and talk and drink tea and like just hang out and be women together and nap and what, like, doesn't that sound amazing? Wouldn't you love to just go inside of a red tent and bleed with your girlfriends? I know it sounds kind of weird, but like that's where this comes from. So being able to come back to that natural state of being with women, with femininity, instead of this shame and guilt of hiding your tampons and not telling anyone you're on your period and just pushing through. Instead, we create this community of, I'm supporting you. What do you need? You're on your period, girlfriend, me too. What are you eating? Let's talk about whatever, right? Even if that's just in a group chat, that's another way that I am creating this space that eventually my daughter will be part of. And the great thing about this space too is that if you're open with these girlfriends, so like you're linking arms with another girlfriend who wants to learn about this, that's great. Maybe it's just the two of you. And what might be awesome is that you're on opposite parts of your cycle. So when you're on your period, maybe she's ovulating, so she's mid-cycle. And when you communicate, like, I'm on my period, I'm losing it, I am total low energy, and she's like, guess what? I'm ovulating. I feel so good. Bring your kids over, right? And then flip-flop that. Next time she'll be like, day one over here, can you help me out? And girlfriend's like, homegirl, I got you. Like, I'm about to take my kids to the park. I'll pick up your kids, right? This is literally what you can create based around your cycle, and you can open up this dialogue. Then when you get your girlfriends and your moms together, you're talking about it, and guess who's going to hear it? Your daughters, your sons. So the more you can model these types of things just out loud and openly, normalize it, be comfortable with it, the more they're going to pick up on just how natural all of this is. And I still have to catch myself sometimes. Like, I'll be in the bathroom. Of course, kids have no boundaries. A door closed doesn't mean anything. And so I use a menstrual cup, and I'll be emptying my cup, and my daughter walks in and she sees blood, right? And blood to them means injury, emergency, something's wrong, right? And so this has happened before. And she's like, oh my gosh, Mom, you're bleeding. And I'm like, you're right, I am. Guess what? It's a period. And this is what all women do. And I'm on my period right now. Yeah. Like, she's 5, so I'm not going to be like, right, so this is the shedding of my uterine lining, and I'm not getting into all that, but I'm just like, yeah, look at this. I'm on my period. I use this cup. This is what this is in the shower, right? But also not overwhelming her with like, yeah, this is what happens. I'm not sad about it, and I'm not getting into too much detail. It's just like, yep, this is what we do. I'm on my period, and she'll remember that, and then the conversation will get longer and more in depth as she experiences it. So that's how modeling and just letting them be a part of it as naturally as it comes.
The normalizing it and creating a community around it, there would be so much power in that. And to be honest with you, it's like, how many groups do we become a part of? But I have literally never heard of a community around periods. It's like mom group or book club or a hiking group or a runners club. But how amazing to be able to support our girlfriends in that way. All of a sudden, I want to jump on my phone and text my girlfriends right now and be like, hey, we need to create this club or this group or this community. And I'll make them listen to the podcast first so that it all makes sense. But wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And it just brings back the way we were designed. And it really helps us to tap into that divine design, right? And feel validated and that we're not alone and that we're normalizing all of this. And it takes a while to find friends who might be willing to do it or want to learn about it, or it's a building process. It's the long game, but it's definitely, if you think about how old our daughters are now, that long game, like we need that long game because they're in it for the long game. So it definitely, these little things do add up to make a really big difference in your own cycle syncing and in how our children grow up to learn differently than what you and I were learned or not taught.
Now you're creating a whole course. Tell me a little bit about the course, what you're hoping women get from it. Does it apply to women on birth control? Does it apply to women who are in early phases of menopause or even in menopause? I want to hear all the things about what this course can do for women.
Great. So my course is a small baby. I have put so much work and effort into it. And the reason why I wanted to do it was because I found my information from a lot of different sources. I spent a lot of time investing in this content, a lot of money investing into this, and I wanted a place where women could come and learn from a zoomed out approach to it, as well as a zoomed in kind of nitty gritty, like the exact details. So my course is called Cycle Sync Academy. And it is a 3-month program that includes the online lifetime access to my online course, group chat, weekly group coaching, as well as hormone testing, because a lot of women don't know what their hormone levels are. And so we go about guessing, not testing, and better to test, not guess, because then you really know what you're working towards. So that's what's included in the program. And the course really, it was so fun to build my course because I really started with the foundation, because you can't just jump right into cycle syncing. You have to learn really about the endocrine system, your hormone health, what hormones are you looking at? How is this all linked in your body to like your nervous system? What does your nervous system have to do with your cycle? A lot, actually. And so it really is this well-rounded approach to your menstrual cycle. And not only is it this zoomed out, but then we zoom in to also what are the 4 phases? What is the nutrition and fitness and self-care for each phase of your cycle. So it's very well-rounded and it's 3 months long. So you get to go through 3 of your cycles while you're applying what you're learning, while you're going through weekly group coaching. So you get to ask all types of questions throughout your phases multiple times over and over, because if you do have a regular cycle, then that should be 3 cycles of going through the program. So to answer your question about birth control, it depends. depends. If a woman is taking the pill, she has no cycles of her own natural hormones. The pill basically puts you in a state of forced menopause. And so basically your hormones are muted and you have no natural cycle. So even though a woman may have a period while taking the pill, it's actually, they call it a pill bleed, because really those sugar pills that you take that are a different color, if you're taking the pill, you know what I'm talking about. There's no hormones in that. There's no synthetic hormones. So it's your body actually just releasing and detoxifying from the previous synthetic hormones. And then you start the pills back up and blah, blah, blah. So you're not actually having a cycle of your own. So if you were on the pill, my recommendation would be transitioning off of the pill and either onto a different type of birth control or to simply learn how to use cycle syncing as your fertility awareness, which is what I do now. But if you're on the IUD, about a year after being on an IUD, a woman may find her cycles regulating and she may even be ovulating. You can't get pregnant even if you're still ovulating. The IUD has ways to protect yourself, but you may find an increased cervical mucus or different signs that your body is ovulating even while you're on the IUD. So you can potentially still sync to your cycle while being on the IUD. It may take diving a little bit deeper, but it's totally possible. So that's birth control. When you're menopausal, your hormones become more muted and you still have some ebbs and flows as far as your energy goes, but it's not necessarily cyclical. However, I have worked with some menopausal women who sync with the moon, which is like a whole nother podcast, but we are cyclical beings and our cycles are typically 28-ish days. And if you look to the moon, her cycle is 28 days as well. She cycles through new moon, which she disappears and she waxes, she gets bigger, she's full, she wanes, gets small. Like we do the same thing. We are cyclical. And so women who are menopausal can start learning more about the moon and the phases. And many women, some that I have worked with, are so shocked at how their energy and their moods, their creativity, their productivity really does sync with the moon. So then your moon becomes your calendar and your guide when you don't have these hormone fluctuations through your own cycles. That's another way to do it. And that is something else that I teach inside Cycle Sync Academy. So it's called moon cycling and moon tracking. And that's definitely something that women can do when they're in that phase of life. My hope with the course was really to supply women with this empowering information about menstrual cycle awareness and body literacy. Just learning not only how to sync to your cycle, but learning about your cycle and your patterns throughout your cycle. So really empowering body literacy was a huge goal for Cycle Sync Academy.
I know so many women in my life that I'm going to highly encourage take your course because I think that knowledge is power and the way that it can transform your life is really only going to be for the better, right? But if I'm listening to you right now and I'm thinking, okay, like I might want to consider this course, but I'm not quite ready, etc. What are 2 things that you would recommend somebody do right now if they're just wanting to have more awareness of their body and their cycles?
Yeah. Okay. So 2 things I would suggest is to start tracking your cycle. Your entire cycle, not just your period, every day of your cycle. So like I mentioned, that could be an at a glance calendar. It could be in your app, but it's every day. So just a little note, even if it's inside your app. I know all the apps have a little note. A caution, if you are using an app for your main source of cycle tracking, just be aware that those apps run on an algorithm based on your period. And so it's not always necessarily correct. And I know that sometimes when you open up the app, it has a little note of like, oh, your cycle day 10, you're ready to crush your goals. And my advice would be to decide how you feel before you open up the app, because sometimes you'll open it up and women will let that be their guide of how they feel. So decide how you feel before you open it up. So number 1 would be to cycle track your entire cycle. And again, pen and paper, you will change multiple times and that's okay. You're going to find a rhythm with what works for you. So cycle tracking. And then second, people always like to know what books or where they can find more information besides just getting lost on Google. I highly recommend the book Own Your Rhythm by Heather Beth. It's Speth. And I have no affiliation to this book. I love it because, first of all, it is approachable. What is this? 90 pages. So it's a thin one, and I like this book because not only does it talk about the 4 phases, but it talks about the 4 inner seasons, which kind of relate to energy level, things you may be feeling in your personality or productivity. And it talks about the moon as well. So even if you're in that area of menopausal or you're in the later stages of perimenopause when your cycles may be pretty irregular, this still applies because she talks about the moon in this book as well. Those would be my 2 tangible tips: is cycle tracking your entire cycle. And then if you want to find more information, Own Your Rhythm is a really great book to get started.
And I'll be sure to link your social media on there as well, because I think a third thing that I would recommend is to attend one of Taylor's master classes. So I attended one of Taylor's master classes, and just in that 1 hour, I learned more about my body than I've known in an entire lifetime of 40 years. And so it was such a big takeaway for me. And I have a girls' night coming up on Thursday, and I'm planning on talking about all the things. And I'm just really, I'm excited about it because my girlfriends, we're all open books with one another. And I think it's just such an important topic. So I'm definitely going to throw that out there as a third thing, that a masterclass that's offered by Taylor is well worth the hour of your time just to garner a little more knowledge.
Oh, thank you, Julie. I appreciate that.
Yes, absolutely. No, it was so informative. And to be sitting on this group call with all these other women from around the country, and it felt very empowering, and just watching all of us kind of have these moments of revelation, it's something I want more of for sure.
I love that. So the next masterclass actually will be, I have it scheduled in mid-March, because right after that, I will open up enrollment for Cycle Sync Academy again. That lands right around spring equinox. So yeah, that masterclass that you attended was really fun. There were about 40 women from all over the world in that class. And so many of them landed in the same place as you, of just where has this information been? Why have I not learned this? And that is why I have to get this message out in the world. So I so appreciate you having me on the podcast to be able to share this information and this knowledge, because knowledge is power, and I really appreciate that.
One last question though is, do you have any more spots available in your current course that you're running through with some women, or have you kind of closed that down and then the next availability is in March?
I have closed it down. I really like to have the group kind of start around the same time. We're only a week in, but I like to have the women start at the same time, because then we're kind of on the same page for the 3 months, especially because I order hormone testing, and I want that to happen as soon as possible so that we have time to read the results and really get a plan in place for that individual. Right now, with our current cohort, which is our winter solstice cohort, that one is closed up, but I will open it up again in mid-March for spring equinox. Spring equinox is actually on March 19th, but I will be opening up enrollment on March 1st for spring equinox. And I always give early bird special discounts, so be on the lookout for that, and I'll do that masterclass in March. If your listeners want to hop on a masterclass and get a better feel for this, what would it feel like to work with Taylor? What more does she have? That would be a great place to learn more.
Well, fantastic. I will be sure to link everything that you need to access Taylor's information in the description of the podcast. And until next time, wander on. If you wandered to this point in the episode, thank you for listening to the Wander Mode podcast. Please leave a review and subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at WanderModeCo. Reach me by email at julie@wandermode.co.